This is a bit humbling, coming to present after that impressive and illustrious line of speakers and thinkers, and then made worse by standing where Faraday stood, making the world a better place, and coming after Ritson, who sort of stole some of my fucking thunder, so just for that. Anyway, so in the spirit of humility, let's try and sort of bring this exhaustive, if not exhausting day back to what it might mean for creativity. So some thoughts and provocations. See what you think. We don't need to make the case for contrarianism. It's good. Doing what the competition hasn't done, can't do, dare not do, creates advantage and change on our terms. It makes us more powerful. Lets us do stuff like that. Stuff that people can't do, won't do, or dare not do. I guess the question then, though, is contrarianism sounds all fine in practice, but how do we get to it? What's the thinking process, and what's the starting point? And there's no shortage of advice and opinion on how to be more contrary. I mean, how do we go against the flow? How do we find that road less traveled for ourselves? Do we think outside the box? Do we seek blue oceans? Do we seek when others sag? Do we disrupt stuff? Do we eat big fish? Do we just blow shit up? I wonder whether the answer actually is a little bit more prosaic, a little bit more obvious, perhaps even a little bit more simple if we dare give it the time. So in time-honored planning manner, I'm going to take John chapter 8, verse 32 as our text for this afternoon. Who knew? And it reads, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The truth of real people in the real world is our best raw material and our best chance for defying convention. But there is a however, and there is a rider, and there is a but. So I want to contend that we, us here in marketing land, in the village of marketing and ad land, we're lost in a fantasy land entirely of our own devising. That's probably the greatest sort of creative act we've created, is this sort of fantasy land that we're all inhabiting together. We're certainly living in something that really resembles self-imposed exile. Consider that 80% of people in the advertising industry in the UK are based in London. Then remind yourselves that 87% of the UK population does not live in London. Remind yourself, consider that CMOs are now actually confessing that they are actually too busy to do marketing because they're too busy running the fucking business. They're too busy to understand the people on whom their livelihoods and their company relies upon. Consider too, I think Huntington's blogged about this vigorously, consider that we've severed the direct link now between planner and consumer. Client organizations no longer willing to fund at scale agencies to do their own rigorous research. Research now reduced to the quick and dirty kind, and most planners completely untrained in the skills of interviewing people. Amazing. And perhaps that accounts for our cultural flat-footedness. Be a good egg, treat your daughter for doing the washing up. Awesome, people will love that. Or consider that, here we go, female social butterflies, and this is a piece of Gap advertising. The social butterfly, obviously female. The little scholar, obviously male. Yes, people will love that. We've got such an intuitive grasp of the world and culture and the reality outside Adland. The truth is we are nothing like the people we serve. We're nothing like them. You hopefully know some of this data. Over 50s account for almost 50% of all UK household expenditure. They, we, I, account for just under 6% of the ad industry. How in touch are we? Just over half the UK population is female. 31% of C-level roles in advertising are occupied by women. Not that representative. You may now burn this theatre down in your rage, women, but 3% of creative directors are female, when over half the UK population is female. I'd argue that we are as connected. Yes. We're as connected to the real world as the attendees and the one percenters and the oligarchs of Davos. He gets everywhere, doesn't he? Look. Fucking joker. And lest we think that we have a secret weapon at our disposal, your intuition, it will fail you. And Mark's referred to some similar studies, so you hopefully will know this data and will cringe at me representing it, but it's worth revisiting it. What proportion of people's TV viewing is live TV? The geniuses of Adland reckon it's about 49%. The truth is it's 87%. Oh, shit, we got that wrong. Okay, next question. How much TV do people watch per day? Well, we guess it's about 161 minutes a day. Truth is it's 215 minutes a day. Oh, shit, we got that wrong again. Ooh, give me another question. Okay. What proportion of TV is watched on other devices? We guess it's about 37%. Oh, crap, it's 2%. What? And invariably, when you present that, there are sort of gasps of the audience. What? How can that be? How can it be that I'm not right? How can it be that my intuition has failed me so catastrophically badly? The fact of the matter is, you probably would have enjoyed today, the other contrarian, Bob Hoffman, puts it, relying on our own behaviors and tastes is narcissism disguised as strategy, if indeed we can call it strategy. The fact of the matter is, for most of the time, most of us are creating for audiences that just don't exist. Those people you think you're trying to engage and reach and entertain and persuade, they're not out there. They don't exist. Google thinks there are people out there who are obsessed with research, doing crazy amounts of research about every fucking purchase decision, right? Because it makes them feel comfortable. Right? So, Google unable to look at human beings other than through the lens of its own product. So Google thinks that all human beings are obsessive researchers. This is sort of fairly indicative of most incoming client briefs. This is how we describe our target audience these days, right? They're determined individualists and identity shapers. They believe the things they create and experience alters who they are and what they become. Their lives are self-constructed mosaics. That's not insight. That's fiction, it's fantasy, it's delusional, and it's also shit creative writing. And yet, that's how we like to think about our customer. It probably speaks volumes about our own self-identity, that we struggle so hard to embrace the truth that the people who we market it to are pretty fucking ordinary. It reveals our own sense of vanity and our own sense of sort of fragile egos. And if we're not sort of creating these sort of fantastical sort of creatures sort of all living at the top of Maslow's pyramid, then we're airbrushing the fuck out of reality. We're sort of creating the sort of stock image consumer. This is a description of the target audience from a client's brief. They're sociable. Right? So, which is, to be honest, I'll say they are people. An image of a consumer or a human being that is so one-dimensional almost that like, if they turn sideways, they disappear. These aren't people. These people don't exist. They're the constructs of our own febrile imagination and vanity. The famed copywriter and colleague of Bill Bernbach, Bob Levinson, got it right, I think, when he said most people ignore advertising because advertising ignores them. It's not for me. You're not interested in me, you don't get me, you don't understand me, you haven't even fucking noticed me. Truth is, we're unable to admit to our own modest place in the grand scheme of things called ordinary life. I mean, Love Marks is still in print. You can still buy it, which is amazing, despite Byron's sort of best efforts to sort of stamp it to death. It still exists. You can buy it, and people are still buying it. Amazing. And the idea that sort of brands and learning about brands and decision and making choices between brands isn't that important to most people most of the time still melts most people's fucking minds. They go, what? Not important to people? There are other things on people's minds other than me? Well, we heard it this morning, didn't we? We literally cannot see beyond beyond the length of our own nose. We can't see beyond what we are actually making, beyond the thing that we are making. We can't see the person on the other side of the ad, the object. So what happens when young black men get shot by police in large numbers and the civil rights movement is reignited in the States and sort of society sort of convulses to that? What's our own best first instinct to that? Well, of course we make it about ourselves. Of course we make it about ourselves because it's all about us. The ad legend Howard Gothard, sort of, I think, sadly, not as high profile as one would have hoped. Do seek his words out. But Gothard, advertising for Gothard was, as he called it, an eyeless mask that effectively prevents the people from behind it to talking to the people in front of it. We think we're connecting and communicating with people with the things we make. We're just creating massive fucking barriers that obscures reality and ordinary people from us. Yeah. We can't see the customer. We're so busy making that sort of piece of landfill. And the truth about it, I'd go further. I'd say too much of marketing, too much of ad land is afflicted with an indifference that from time to time actually borders on what can only conclude is contempt. Too much, you might ask? Have I gone too far? I'll give you a couple of exhibits. First is, listen to what is said in the back rooms of focus group facilities. Don't listen to the respondents, listen to the conversation that happens in that dark room. I'll tell you what happens, it's elitist sniping at the expense of the people on whom we rely, and presumably for whom we are wanting to create value. Joking at their inability to get our sort of postmodern meta sort of narratives and our sort of slightly mediocre piece of advertising. Snipey, 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 snipey. I've been guilty of it. I've done it myself. You know, trying to curry favor with my creative overlords and clients. Elitist sniping. It happens. It still happens. It's awful. Exhibit 2. Well, back in the day, David Ogilvy reminded us that the consumer isn't a moron. But it's pretty easy these days to come across a marketer who actually thinks they are a fucking moron. So in my career, I've been told the following, and I quote. An American marketer once told me, American consumers are very literal. Obviously not him, because he'd had a marketing degree, but American consumers are very literal. I've also been told by an American marketer in Shanghai that Chinese consumers, like all of them, right? So all of them are very literal. I've also been told by a Chinese person in China that all of their fellow country people are very literal. Right? It's not uncommon to find that sort of judgment and contempt being poured upon ordinary people. So we clearly think the people on whom we rely on creating value for are complete fucking morons. Another exhibit for our sort of indifference that borders on contempt. Back in the sort of 20s and 30s, Transport for London was commissioning work like this, that obviously had a message about the benefits and the unique proposition of travelling by underground than overground. But it also had a sense of contributing to the aesthetic environment through which people were travelling, of contributing to it rather than extracting value out of it. So it commissioned work like this. 1926. Go online, because almost all of it's up online. It's an incredible treasure trove of art and advertising working in conjunction. even commissioned Man Ray, a poster we're still trying to decode. Right? Who wouldn't want that in their portfolio? All right, and then we do a ripple dissolve to 2017. Right? And that's an advertiser who cares only about awareness and extracting value out of a customer's wallet and doesn't give a flying fuck about the environment which it is interrupting and is part of. It doesn't give two hoots about human beings. It cares about awareness and it cares about your wallet. So you have to ask, well, what the fuck happened from between 1938 and 2017? Like, what happened to us? Did we just run out of ideas? Did we run out of empathy? Did we run out of respect for our sort of fellow citizens? Or did we just plain old run out of shits to give? I don't know. And you can't talk about indifference bordering on contempt without talking about the fashion industry that consistently treats women as objects for our gratification and pleasure. Literally meat puppets. Objects for our gratification, objects just to be sort of gang raped, objects to be murdered and bundled into the back of a car. Also, fuck you, Quincy Jones. Scratch beneath the surface of advertising and marketing, and you will find indifference, and you will find contempt. And all that should scare the crap out of us. Neil's presenter showed you the same data, so I won't belabor the point. But it's fairly evident that since the 90s, people don't think the adverts are as good as the programs. Now, whether the programs got better or the ads got worse doesn't really matter. Relatively speaking, we're losing. We're losing the cultural battle. And then look to the new generation of cultural creators and shapers. iBallistic Squid actually wants to inspire his fans and make them more creative. Takahashi thinks her audience are fucking cool and full of ideas and energy. J.K. Rowling actually likes her readers. Donald Glover actually thinks that people are smart and can read the tea leaves of culture. They're better than us. All of popular culture is better than us and dwarfs everything we do. And we say we're here to shape culture. Please. So we can escape, and we must escape if we wish to have a future. So some thoughts and pointers on the escape routes out of this little pickle. First, we've got to see past the labels that obscure truth and bulldoze reality into oblivion. I mean, we really love our labels, don't we? Greys, boomers, striving mums, eco-warriors, those sort of garbage psychological segmentation, frugal sallies, you know, experiencers, urban hedonists, our favorite millennials. Yeah, we love compartmentalizing and labeling people. It's one of our greatest passions as an industry. It's also really, really stupid. I'll give you this. What is this little guy? Well, depending on where you live in the world, you'd call him a brown-throated thrush. Or if you're in Germany, you would call him a Halsenvogel. Or if you're living in China, you would call him a Chungling. Right, there you go. You now know what that is. Great. Great physicist and humanitarian Professor Feynman, though, knows that is absolute fucking garbage. As he points out, even if you know the names for that little critter, you still know nothing about the bird. You only know something about people, what they call the bird. That's all you know. So all those labels we have give the illusion of knowledge and understanding and insight. But actually, I think most of the time they sort of disguise profound ignorance. You don't understand the consumer. You just know the label. And jargon is the language of power, not truth. Jargon is about claiming identity, it's about claiming membership of technocratic elites, about being in the know, It's about hiding your own fucking ignorance. Jargon is not interested in revealing the truth to the light. We've got to embrace the dark side of people. If we want to see people clearly, we have to see the darker side of people and life. Now, the corporation loves plain, easy, steady as she goes sailing, right? The corporation is an exercise largely in keeping chaos at bay, I'd argue. So it loves stability, and it loves order, and it abhors a mess. But that bias of the corporation can't prevent it from admitting to the contingency and messiness of real life as lived by real people. It can't prevent us from seeing that, because it's the stuff of life. Call it insight if you must. But who hasn't had this as pushback from a consumer insight manager? The insight's too negative. To which I say, well, thank fuck Shakespeare didn't take your advice. Fuck's sake. And of course, and I know you guys have been much exercised by this issue, we've got to get out more, right? Because time spent in meetings is time spent not in culture. It's time spent in meetings, the bubble removed from real life. And if you are understanding and learning about the world of the consumer and the life outside your corporation via the meeting room, then, my friend, you do not understand the world or the consumer. You just understand the words in the presentation, which is something completely different. You can read. Congratulations. But you don't understand the world of the consumer. And if, heaven forbid, you are doing things that you call consumer safaris, yeah? Your alienation from the real world, my friend, is total and complete. Right? You should find some other avenue of life to sort of channel your sort of pathological urges. We do need to get out of here, obviously. Fun though it is. We certainly need to get out of here, definitely out of that room, to places like that, and places like this, and places like that. Obviously, it's the foundation of that thing we call account planning. It's timeless wisdom, it's essential wisdom, and it's good wisdom. But let's probably not congratulate ourselves too much if we rediscover it, because it's kind of like, duh. And we've got to find new ways of seeing. I mean, we could reattach anthropology to ethnography. I mean, there is a difference. And not to go down to the rabbit hole of new methodologies. Yeah. So it would be a really tedious market research society conference otherwise. We could reattach analysis skills to interviewing skills. That would be a step forwards. Right? We could attach social scientists to data scientists, because Lord knows data scientists need some grasp of what moves the human mind. We could also, I suggest, let people actually for once talk about what they want to talk about, rather than only ever answer the stupid questions to which we want answers. Right? Let's just give people a chance to tell us what matters to them and what's important to them. And we could, I think, begin more imaginatively to use other methods and other eyes to rescue the unperceived world from what somebody once called the oblivion of our own not noticing. Right? We could leverage the eyes of the documentary makers, the embedded journalists, the experts living within the communities and cultures we're trying to understand. We can even use the eyes of the artist to see what we're blind to. I'll give you one example. A small reading, perhaps, is in order here. What if we could feel, not see or read or understand, but what if you could actually feel what it's like to be a teenager living in a rather grubby North London housing estate in the year of our Lord 2018? What if you could actually feel what that's like? Well, you could let Guy Gunnaranju be your guide. He's going to let you feel what it's like. So you indulge me here. I'm going to read just a short passage, see if it works for you. He writes, "We were London's scowling youth. Our tongues were so soaked in our defences we hoped only to outlast the day. We revelled in throwing crafted curses at our mothers and receiving hard slaps to our heads. Our combs cut lines in our hair and we scarred our eyebrows with blades. We became warrior tribes of Mandem, slave kings and palm-swiping cubs we were. Our parents knew nothing, and most others only knew us from the noise we made at the back of the buses. Close without touch. That was the only love permitted, though it was deeply felt amongst our own. It was like we lived upon jagged teeth in the dark in this bone-cold London city, a young nation of mongrels, constantly measuring ourselves against what we were supposed to be, which was what? I couldn't tell you. £9.35. Hardback edition, right? Do you want that or 18 focus groups? Right, we're almost there. I suggest that good and surprising things happen when we escape Adland, when we stop talking to ourselves, when we see people, when we really see people, and actually put them first. So, councils that prioritize the aesthetic sensibilities of rich neighbors over the safety of residents, billionaires who campaign to have the tents of the homeless removed, companies that underfund workers' pensions, trillion-dollar empires that refuse to integrate with the communities in which they reside, corporations pursuing for-profit industrial-scale surveillance and censorship, employers whose staff rely on food stamps, hyper-targeted, hyper-efficient, hyper-optimized, hyper-fucking-creepy stalking. I suggest these days putting people first is probably the most unconventional thing anybody could do. You're welcome.